Here we discuss introspection, being, development, and all the good stuff. The modern mistake that I think is crucial for this section and discussion is one of anti-fundamentalist views. More so, it's not the modern idea that's the problem, but the sense that it has to be modern. It's the view that we need to let go of ancient, skeleton parts of our beliefs, and we need to rid ourselves and become modern. So I don't think it's the idea within modernity, but rather the word modern itself, that there's no end. It's an endless pursuit, because once you're modern, then you need to modernize that modern view. And it's the continuous, cleansing of ancient mistakes, moral problems, and such. This being the case, let's discuss how this is a root problem and how to leave this problem, but not remove the fantastic developments that modernity brings, and the view that being modern is appropriate and something to strive for. So first, the critique, as usual. The critique. What brings you to be modern if not your past? How can you build and become revolution from something that's not there? You are attached to that previous state of being in the ancient, stage before the modernity. That being the case, you cannot leave the roots of the fabrics of modernity behind when you strive for modernity. You can't become anew without recognizing that you are becoming anew from something fundamentally before the anew stage. Let's give an example. The cafe experience that we have that's standard in our societies, our modern societies, and the Wi-Fi and the laptop and the social arena that it's taking place in our cities, especially our cities. That is built on a previous institution of social gathering. Although modern, it's nothing but a relic of the past in a certain sense. There's the Wi-Fi edition, there's the coffee focus, there's the isolation of certain parties and the aura, but the institution of sitting together in this space where we're comforted by each other's company, even without any deep social interaction, is an ancient thing. So you cannot say that the cafes are a revolution of its own new regard. Another example would be, the democratic process. Now, the democratic process is a build of a previous process. I'm not a student of such study, but I would assume from the English common law and before that, and eventually leading up to the dictatorships and the monarchs of previous decades, previous millenniums. And that the monarch itself was a development. Not always was there such a thing as a monarch. It was very tribal. We know that there was a switch from tribal to monarchy. So tribal is a predecessor of monarch. So You can't have a monarchy without appreciating tribalism. So that being the case, the democratic process needs to appreciate the monarchy. And the monarchy needs to appreciate the tribal, although there was different forms of monarchies. There's a dictatorship, there's the Greek version, the Roman version, the Senate, to balance somewhat of power. Then there's the dictatorship aspect, important for war engagements and crucial quick-minute decision type of environments. So to say that the democratic process is the best process and is revolutionary and needs to be upheld also means that the monarchy skeleton needs to be upheld. That is to say that you can't learn democratic without monarchy. They're one and the same, although it's a modern version of its previous past. So I think the mistake that the modern view makes is that you are not a new kind of being. You were not once ape and now human, but you are in itself a build of the past. For example, the computer, you are a previous build of the computer. You are Intel, 5th generation. Now you can't get to an Intel 12, 13 generation chip without the Intel first, second, third, the beginning stages of Intel's chips. They are builds on its past. So they need to be appreciated as such. And the second you claim that a 13th generation, chip from Intel is in its own right, you are fundamentally wrong. You were just wrong because if you study deeply the 13th generation chip, you will find sentiment going back all the way to the beginning, because it's just an appropriation of a previous stage. This is such an important, obvious aspect. The father, the child. If you study the child long enough, you'll find the parents. If you study those parents, you'll find the parents before them. You can't say the child is modern and a new being beyond the parents, because that's just fundamentally wrong. You haven't studied enough. And I think diligent study in any aspect of some sort of revolution of a previous predecessor will come to the conclusion that you need to respect and honor the ancient aspects that bring you to the present. Now, the reason we're ignoring this aspect, because it's obvious, so we have to ask, what is the motive to ignore such an obvious idea? It's not even an idea, it's just a reality. It's an objective reality. So what would be the motive for the modern person to object such a view? And it's quite apparent when you discuss this with anybody, and they'll somehow formulate an argument that, well, if you go that route, then we have to go to the past. We have to become a monarch, and we're afraid of becoming a monarch because that will lead to dictatorship and we'll lose our freedom. And so it's the fear of experiencing the predecessor in the modern state. If you tell them that, you're really, Intel's 13th generation chip is really a first generation built from a second generation, built on a third generation, and so on. Their fear is, well, then we're going to just go back in time and be stuck in those first generations. And that's a great fear, because it is true. The more you recognize the past that makes the present, the more you're bound to that past. If you recognize the father is the blueprint of the child, then you're bound to the father. And people don't want to be bound to that father because they want to be their own person. They want to be a democratic process beyond the monarchy. They don't want that monarchy in them. They want to be better than that. Well, it's a fear. Let's discuss the pros and cons of this fear. Well, the pro is that there's some sense to that. You don't want to be a fundamentalist in a modern era where you're anti-electricity because it's just the way the previous generations dealt with things, and maybe it's a better state of being because you are disconnecting from reality as such. The con is that it's over-justified, such a fear. Meaning, you're not going to, just by accepting the fact that a monarchy is the build of a democratic process is not going to necessarily just seek the previous stage, because there's a recognition in the current stage that there's a previous stage. And why should that be forgotten? Just as the past is remembered, why shouldn't the present development of modernity be forgotten? And if the fear is stemming from a place where, well, maybe modern state of being is worse than a previous state of being, well, then why are you afraid to discover a better state of being? Aren't you trying to be modern in the sense of becoming better? And if better is the past, then go to the past. Now, if you're unwilling to face the fact that you've made bad decisions your whole life, generally speaking, and now you're going to have to face that, well, that's just deception. You should be so modern that you're willing to accept a past stage that is better than your current version. And we have this in technology. You know, there's sometimes where technology gets so advanced, and sometimes it's, well, that previous generation was better. It did better things. It ran smoother, you know, with the imposition of just faster and higher speeds and better graphics and more learned systems. It's just overcomplicated things. And yes, a previous generation is better. Maybe I don't need to predict every search result. I need to explore it for myself. So the modern version might not be better. It doesn't have to be better. And we're not forced by that proposition. We're forced by truth, if that's what we're seeking, because modern means that we're trying to develop towards something, and it's better be truth or moral superiority or something of a vision. Because you can't be modern without a vision. You can't be. What are you being modern about? The technological specialty of our current society? For what? For what purpose? To better the human being? For what? For a better human being? For a better experience of life? To focus on the more important things? To have a vision. You'll lead back to vision at some point. So anyway, I think what's motivating this disregard for the obvious idea that anything modern is built on something previous is because there's a fear. There's a fear of going back to the past. There's a fear of admitting a global mistake. You know, it just shows a generation of just failures. And that's something that no one's ready to accept. Now, could it be true or could it not be true? It's very possible it's not true. But it's the fear that's motivating not to face such an obvious idea. Now, so what's the proper approach? Now I've discussed and culminated some of the ideas of why it's broken. It's broken to view life as modern and disillusioned or separated from the past. Now, what's the proper approach? Well, religions have this problem because we're obsessed with modernity of every scale, whether it's physical, whether it's mental, emotional. We're just obsessed with that movement. The religions just can't keep up. You know, the second they're ready to abolish, you know, some parts of their faith based on some moral development of society, there's another thing that they have to face, and then another, and they're just living in the shadow of trying to compete with society's never-ending moral changes. So we can't ignore society, because that becomes problematic, because they have the arguments. And you need to follow those arguments if you want to be a player of that society. And since you are already a player, might as well follow them. Might as well at least open the discourse and discussion for them, because they're hitting others. They better be hitting you, because you're a part of that. So I discussed this in length in other videos, how we're an interplay of society, and ignoring that is never a good solution. It brings isolation, communal or individual isolation. Well, anyway, back to religion. Religion has this problem. Like, how do they approach that? So there's something called moral relativism, which just means that, it's changing, allow the religion to change with society. But it's still a problem, because essentially modern just means to rid everything ancient. And since religions is built on past, it's in threat. It's a threat by default. Well, how to go about this? Well, recognize that just as the monarch is the build of modernity, so is our belief systems built on previous frameworks of mind of ancient times, of many different religions. Recognizing that also means that you need to allow space for the care of that culture, and to almost impose your own life of ancient ways. For example, electricity revolutionized the lighting of our darkness. It used to be each candle cost, each illumination was valuable. Now with electricity, things could be illuminated for nothing. Nothing of value, right? And based on that, well, you got the monarchy that brought about the democratic process. So you need an appreciation and a mark of that remembrance of that monarchy in the democratic experience. Meaning that you're going to need to bring some concepts from that monarch era into your modern space. Why is this so? Because you can't forget that these are the fabrics of what built the democratic process. Because what would happen if you do forget? Then the democratic process will decline too, because it's only a build of a previous stage. So when it comes to religion, you do need to lead a fundamentalist life if you want to sustain the religion long term. Because if you're not collectively remembering in a daily manner the frameworks that brought you to a newer, heightened sense of some sort of spirituality, then you don't have what to look back on when you are unclear of how to continue. For example, if you have, let's say, a textual like Bible, which you're bound to, which your religion preaches as holy and sacred, to take the modern sense and say, oh, everything is not literal because we need to connect that to moral relativism. We want to connect it to reality itself in real time. Well, then 2 generations later, and the text will not be here, because that appreciation of just that lack of appreciation of just kind of saying everything's a metaphor and it's not really there and it's just a story. Well, the next generation is going to see it as the story itself. And the generation after is going to say, well, there's other stories. And the generation after that will be like, oh, we're not interested in these stories right now. And it will just fall out of style because there's nothing in current life that's keeping that fundamentalist history in your current being. Well, what are we worried about? We're worried about fundamentalists as a totality of our being. For example, just living a life of Bible, just what that preaches, we do. And that calls for huge mistakes in our society, because if you start taking ideas of the Bible and putting them into fruition in current modern society, well, you're going head on society itself. You are an attack. You are making an assault on society. And that's not good. That's not good, because you're not appreciating the fact that you are a part of society. So you want to keep these books on your shelf and respect them as such, and almost bring a literal approach to them as much as you can without imposing on your society or on your comfort of being in your current values, and allow them to contend. Allow the past to contend with the present. Allow that battle to be waged, where the Bible, let's say, says something anti-homosexuality, and you put in your daily practice and arguments some sort of development of that. Yet you also become aware of society's developments of something that attunes to homosexuality being an expression of sexuality that should be respected. And you allow them to battle each other. But the second you say, well, the Bible is ancient, it doesn't really have a grip on reality and should be shelved, not in your house, but in someone else's, should be shelved away and forgotten, or taking it into some sort of fantastical depiction, like really it's not homosexuality, but it's bestiality and so on and so forth, or saying that this author is confused, or any sort of route, you're limiting the sacredness of your religion and your text, and it may last your lifetime, that the fact that the text still exists. But since it's become so irrelevant to you, it won't last a generation. And then all you will have is society's preach of morality, which may be good or maybe not good, or another culture that you attach yourself to. But if you want to keep that religion with you because you find huge value in it, you could implement them in your life to a certain extent while giving room for the morality that's being preached in current society. But those who mesh the two, try to put them together, is also mistaken, because you can easily find ways to interpret text with your moral development, with the way you see the world. You find that vegetarianism is a better approach to nature, right? And then you could quickly go to Genesis and find room for that, especially that, right? And ignore the other aspects of sacrificial animals on a constant. So you can do that, although when you start meshing, what you're really doing is saying, I'm imposing me on that. And I'm not allowing that to have its say without my imposition. It's like I am stuffing my information down the Bible's throat. At some point, the Bible will give way, and what will be left is just your information, how you see fit. And the Bible will fall away, even 10, 20 years from that date that you start such a meshing of process. So you don't want to mesh the two. You don't want to mesh the ancient with the current. You don't want to say, oh, the president should be called king now. And it's not really king as a monarch, but king as a president. And we're just going to have some sort of mesh of monarchy to democratic. You don't want to mesh the two, because then what your ideas are will be imposed on everything. And nothing will be left to be the framework of which you revisit. Let's discuss that for a second, because it's a good idea. Why is it so important to keep these ancient frameworks alive in our current beings in our current daily lives. The importance is because, as we discussed one concept, but another, that it's the framework which you could fall back on, because life is not simple and it gets confusing. And also we wander in life and wander in ideas, and society wanders. And it's amazing to have, that's why we're obsessed with knowledge and books, because these things are frameworks where we could revisit and go into and submerge ourselves to, and then walk out, go back to our lives, and allow that to govern a certain sense of our lives. And we accept that anytime we read a book or read an idea or listen to an idea. We accept that it's going to manipulate us, and we want that because we don't have all it takes within us to develop every framework of life. We need ideas to overcome us that we have to battle. It's almost like the father needs to test the son, and for example, if you're playing with your kid, and you see that they're going over a precipice that they could fall on and hurt themselves, right? But instead of keeping them in a safe place, the father places them at the precipice in arm's length to protect them if they fall, and get them to feel the experience of the fall and learn how to adapt to that surroundings and allow their fear to govern their choices of movement. And that's a very healthy thing to do, because you're imposing a framework on the child that the child will never develop by themselves unless there's some deep hard work. But there's nothing in them that they have the natural fear, but there's nothing in them that will just express that experience. But if you impose it on them, then now that they have to contend with it. So after that experience, they will always well, this was experienced before, and now how do I deal with it now? And maybe this precipice is not something I should do, and go there. And soon you have these frameworks which the father imposes on the child, and then as the child grows up and the father says, well, you should say thank you after you receive that gift, as opposed to what you did, which was not say thank you, right? So the father's imposing a framework of some sort of gratuity to society. Now the child could develop at some point that framework, maybe understand that, recognizing what brings your goodness is something to appreciate and focus on, but it's not necessarily going to be there. And even more importantly, let's say the child is some mastermind person that could come up with ideas like this on their own. They won't have a frame to go back to. Meaning to say, let's say we're adults now, and we've understood that saying thank you is important to when somebody gives you something. We won't always reach out to that idea unless it was imposed on us. If we developed it on our own, then it's just a flow of our being, and sometimes we'll remember it and sometimes we won't. We don't have the discipline to say this is something important and we're going to do this anyway. We can't do that in ourselves unless we attach to either something else or someone imposes that on us, meaning someone sees us in the street not saying thank you, and then they're like, well, that's not a proper way of being. Say thank you. And now they've imposed their framework on us, and now we have to deal with that. And that's the greatest gift, because now we're able to go back to that framework at any time without having to allow just the natural flow of being. Because some discipline is necessary. That's all I'm saying. Some discipline is necessary. And that discipline only comes by you imposing ideas on yourself that you don't fully understand at the moment or ever, or someone else is imposing on you. But it's an imposition. That's what discipline is. It's not allowing the natural flow of being to happen, but rather you are going to the bookshelf and picking out a book and saying, I'm going to take that information, no matter what it is, and impose it on myself and see what happens. And then I have to, once that I'm done that book, I'm going to have to contend with that book. There's me, and then there's the information of that book. So going back to modern, the original discussion, modern and fundamentalist, the proper approach for the modern mind is that they need to impose on their modern life an ancient version, an ancient relic, to give reminder of that component that brings about their modernity, because modernity is a build of the past. And if the past becomes forgotten, you don't even have modernity, and also you don't recognize reality as such. So what you do is you impose you impose the relics of the past on your current life, recognizing that it's the past, but also that it's the present. It has a component to the present. And doing such work will allow you to be able to negotiate between the past and the present. So let's say, the iPhone 11 is not as good as the iPhone 10. Well, since you've kept and recognized the iPhone 10 as such, you could always go back to it and say, well, I don't like the iPhone 11 now. I'm going to go back to the iPhone 10. I'm going to pull out from there. It's a framework of reference to go back to. And as such, for the religions that struggle with this, you need to impose a certain fundamentalist, culture imposition on our daily lives for that religion to thrive and function. Because if not, it won't be remembered as an important component of who we are. And once it's not remembered, it will be forgotten. And once it's forgotten, it won't exist. It will exist just to critique it, but then there's nothing left to spark it alive to the future. And allowing that religion to be a relic, but not just a relic, a part of our lives, and a frame to go back to when searching for something beyond your being. Just as we have, a literary vast collective experience like that. There's these certain books that have influenced society. Respecting them as such and keeping them in your bookshelf allows you to impose their ideas on you and your current self. Now, nobody would say, let's get rid of all books, because we need to be modern beyond those books. And those books are relics. They're the past. They have morals attached to them. They're broken, right? You don't want to say that, because you need frames to go to. Even if they're not according to your morals now, you need frames to go to come back to who you are. And if you actually are moral and you are something more developed than those books, then you will have answers to those things. Although you don't need to throw out those books, because let them contend with you. Let them fight with you. Allow the battle to ensue. You'll only become stronger. And the cost of taking out all frames to go back to is also the cost of the father who doesn't impose any frame on the child. So what the child has is this infinite experience of being without any imposition, and the flow of life just goes anywhere. And, something tastes good and something, there's no reason for anything, because they're not bound to anything, because nothing was bound to them. And then they can't go to the bookshelf and take out the metaphorical book that will reference them in time and then give them what to fight about. We need to fight. We need to struggle. But if the father doesn't impose a framework, there's no struggle. Now, thank God life is full of struggle, so it will be imposed on us. And they will start to define us, because a struggle is also an imposition of an idea, an experience that we have to fight with. We have to fight with who is us compared to that. What usually happens is we're just we're just going to go through the motions of our natural instinct in those struggles. We won't have a better, more developed sense of it because we don't have any other frame other than us as we are, or that experience of trouble. For example, someone who has never been imposed with any sort of discipline or ideas or religion or any sort of framework of reference, and they go through a traumatic event, how they deal with that trauma will be very simplistic. They'll deal with it however the world offers, and their body will move however it sees fit. And they will struggle in circles because all they have is that trauma, that imposition, and them. But they can't leave themselves or that trauma to something else, a third party that could mediate between them and the trauma. Like, I found this in my own traumatic experiences, like going through it. And something so great about just going to the Bible, like, let's triangulate that. Because if it just goes back trauma to me, we'll take Freud and all the developed theories, we'll impose them, but I'm confused in it because where am I in that? And I don't have any frames to fall back on when I'm confused between these two things. So then I triangulate that to the Bible and find concepts there and stories there where I could force this energy towards and allow me to contend with the Bible as a mediator between the trauma and me. That way, nobody gets lost in the mix. The trauma doesn't get lost because it has what to shadow on. If not me, then the Bible. And the Bible doesn't get lost because I've kept it as a frame of reference. I don't get lost because I could always throw myself back away to the Bible. Like I could say, well, it's a Bible problem. You know, it's God, or it's something beyond me. It's in this frame. So it's like using glasses. Remember when we had that what was it, the UV thing? We had whatever, any sort of strong light, and you have to wear glasses for, right? What are you doing? There's this strong light which is being. It's confusing. It's chaotic, and you're putting lenses on which will separate that extensive light and only give you a diluted amount of light that you could comprehend and experience, or you can actually manage. Your eyes can manage. And what that does is you are not being untruthful by putting on those glasses, by putting on that separation. You were just being realistic that you need a frame to fall into in order to comprehend what you are experiencing. And if modern just means, this is new, we are a whole new being, and it's all not just development, but a whole new state of mind, and the ancient doesn't take part in our current selves in a real manner, then when we're messing with our lives, when we're dealing with our lives, we're stuck having no reference of a lens to see something through. So it's just too much light. It's too much of like, where do I go? There's no path because there's so many paths. For example, let's say you're going online. I've posted this recently. Like, you're going online and there's so much information. You just don't know where to go. And you don't have any frame to say, okay, I'm connected to this concept, so I'm going to look through that concept to the internet. For example, in this discussion, I was looking up Jewish magic. Like in reference to mysticism and realism, like that obsession that especially the Jewish perspective has, where everything, the real, has to have a mystical element. That it's not enough that it's just supernatural, but that natural itself is supernatural. Whatever the concept was, and that frame gave me a lens of where to browse the internet to find information. But that being the case, I was able to access the information with a separate frame. And if you would tell me, oh no, just go on the internet and just be yourself, then it will be a disarray of information. I need something to fall back on, to have a frame for which to see something through. So this is also the case. You need that ancient frame to see your present modern self. So you need those frames to help you. Now, don't get the mistake of just being obsessed with the frame and being like, I need to uphold the frame over modernity, because it's just a frame. Your present life is more important than a frame. But you need the frame in order to get to actual things that your heart will connect to. Because if not, it's just too much information. It's too many ideas, and there's a confusion of self within it. So, in conclusion, being a modern without recognizing the ancient is wrong, based on the arguments I've made. Being a relic in the face of modern is wrong, because you have reality that you have to deal with that's different from your fundamental beliefs. That's also wrong, because you're not being in touch with normalcy of experience. And thirdly, the best option is to impose framework of reference from the past, especially those that contribute to your present, like modernity, that contribute to your presence, impose them in your life, impose them in your daily basis, really in your daily basis. It can't be an imposition that's like, oh yeah, it's great to just connect back to it once a year or go back to it as a joke, or it has to be a real serious imposition. And that will be a great frame of reference for how you deal with the moral experiences of now, deal with modernity as of now. And sometimes you could enmesh yourselves with modernity, and in doing so, you can separate from your past for the moment and then go back to your past. You could use them to frame each other. You could frame, for example, I find that studying the Bible through like the feminist literary critique is amazing, because you can see things in the moral developments of our day and age and see it with a frame towards that ancient Bible, which illuminates both the Bible and that moral development. But then at the same time, use the Bible to frame the feminist movement, right? The feminism, like, that's also amazing, and that's not used as much. So doing both, allowing the frames, but recognizing that everything is built on each other. So ignoring one as a good frame of reference is just being foolish, because the longer you go, the cheaper that frame of reference will be. And at some point, it will not just become a relic, it will become inexistent. And it will be forgotten from your generations and the generations to come. And you've only get to your developments based on a lot of those frame of references. And then you expect your children and grandchildren to somehow get there without having those frame of references, which is just a foolish endeavor. So don't go the foolish path. Go the righteous path. The balance between the two. That's what I would say. But do your own. Tell me what you think about this. Thanks for listening. And if you would like to see the video version of this, check out my channel on YouTube.